Hey guys, tonight we're going to talk about explorers and the establishment of empires. So you can see in your SOL the different people and the places we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about explorers from Portugal, Spain, England, and then France. So let's go ahead and get started. First is Portugal. Bartholomew Diaz. There's a picture of him. He is important because he took the knowledge in 1488, took the knowledge that Prince Henry the Navigator, who we talked about last night in our video, he took the knowledge that his school had come out with, had disseminated, had given to the navigators, especially of Portugal, and he traveled down the coast of Africa. So he travels all the way down the western coast of Africa down to the tip to a place called Cape Good Hope, or that's what the Portuguese named it, was Cape Good Hope. This is significant because it opens up the possibility of traveling around Africa and reaching India or Asia for the Portuguese. So now it gives Portuguese hope that they can send another expedition, another explorer, another ship, and they can actually make it all the way around the tip of Africa and up to Asia and India. This is important because the Mediterranean had been cut off to the Portuguese and to really the rest of the European countries for trading by the Italian, who dominated trade in the Mediterranean Sea. So they were coming up with the Portuguese were coming up with their own trade route to Asia and India. So Diaz's expedition specifically led the way for Vasco da Gama. There's a picture of da Gama, who 10 years later, in 1498, took a voyage that led him all the way around the southern tip of Africa and east into Asia. This is important because it secures that eastern trade route for the Portuguese. They are the first country to do this, and so they dominate the trade of that eastern trade route to Asia. So it makes them really wealthy off of being able to trade, import, and export goods to and from Asia, especially importing goods or bringing goods from those Asian countries to Portugal and the rest of Europe. And because of da Gama and da Gama himself on his voyages, he sets up these trade posts. More were set up after his voyage, but these trade posts start popping up down the coast of Africa on the way to India. This is a place for Portuguese goods to go. It's also safe ports for Portuguese ships to stop in. So this is extremely important for building a trade network that spans across that far of a sea voyage. And there are some of the goods that were imported from Asia and India by the Portuguese. So spices, tea, ceramics, and textiles. We've talked about some of those before. Next is Spain. So first is Christopher Columbus. There's a picture of Columbus on the side of your screen. Of course, we all know Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. And Columbus was an Italian sailor. He had studied and he had heard all these theories and ideas, and he was determined that he could travel, he could sail west from Europe and make it to Asia, to the East Indies, to China, to India. He believed he could go west and that it was just on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. He guessed it was about 2,500 miles west of European mainland to Asia. And so he went to kings and queens in different countries in Italy, in Portugal, in Spain, in France, trying to convince them to fund his exploration. And for 7 years, everyone told him no, until Isabella told him yes. Isabella of Spain told him yes, and she decided the gains outweighed the risks, and she gave him the money. And Columbus did hit land, but he didn't hit Asia. He guessed 2,500 miles, and Asia is about 10,000 miles west of European mainland. But he lands in what we now know as Caribbean, and he lands on those islands, and he's convinced that it's Asia, and he thinks he's landed in India specifically. And he calls the people there Indians for India, and he spends the rest of his life convinced that he has found the western trade route to Asia. So he was wrong, he was off, but he's extremely important because he discovers the New World, and this discovery leads to years, hundreds of years of European exploration and domination of North and South America. Next is Hernando Cortez. There's a picture of him above. His expedition you need to know about is in 1519. Cortez was one of the conquistadors, which was just a Spanish word for conquerors. So these men were explorers who were going to these new lands, and they were literally conquering the indigenous people, or the people who lived there. They were conquering these new lands in the name of Spain. So Cortez himself lands in mainland, what we know today as Mexico, where he meets the Aztecs, and his expeditions will end up decimating the Aztec population. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a later video, but for now you need to know that Cortez landed in mainland Mexico and met with the Aztecs. Francisco Pizarro is next, with the funny little hat on his head. His expedition was in 1532. He landed in Peru and encountered the Incas. Much like Cortez, the Incas tried to offer him wealth, try to pacify him, but he's another conquistador, and they end up decimating the Incan population as well. And lastly, for Spain is Ferdinand Magellan. Magellan sailed in 1519, but that's when he left. He was the first person to circumnavigate the world. So he left from Europe and he traveled east around the southern tip of South America, and he ended up making it across the ocean back to India, and he lands in Asia, and unfortunately there he gets mixed up in a war, and he ends up dying. But what's left of his crew gets back in their ship, and they sail, and they make it back to Spain, and they are the first to circumnavigate the world. Notice they came back in 1522, so 3 years later they make it back. England. So we're going to talk about one man from England. His name is Francis Drake, or Sir Francis Drake. His expeditions were between 1570s and 1580s, and he really traveled everywhere. He went to Africa, he went to the Caribbean, he went all over the world, and he was technically a pirate. He raided other ships, and most importantly for our knowledge of this unit is that he was a slave trader. So he participated in the slave trade. He became very wealthy because of the slave trade, and so that is what he is known for. He's also known for defeating the Spanish Armada, which we talked about with Elizabeth I. It was her reign when he defeated the Spanish Armada. And remember, the Spanish Armada was the largest navy in the world at that time. It was about 120 ships that the English defeated. So that was super important. It really established England as the superpower of the world at that point in time. And lastly, we're going to talk about a man from France. This is Jacques Cartier. His important voyage was in 1434, and he lands in Canada. He travels up a river into Canada, and he lands at a place, and he calls it Mount Royal, which later turns into Montreal. So this establishes France's claim in the New World. So this is where France's claim in their empire within the New World begins. So they end up claiming all of Canada. That's why Canada today, Canadians speak French, is because of Cartier and a couple other explorers who landed in France and claimed France for France.